Only you can deprive yourself of anything. Do not oppose this realization, for it is truly the beginning of the dawn of light. Remember also that the denial of this simple fact takes many forms, and these you must learn to recognize and to oppose steadfastly and without exception. This is a crucial step, and this should be underlined and not forgotten. This is a crucial step in the reawakening. The beginning phases of this reversal are often quite painful, for as blame is withdrawn from without, there is a strong tendency to harbor within. It is difficult at first to realize that this is exactly the same thing, for there is no distinction between within and without. In other words, if you have been blaming everyone else for your woes and for the awful life you've been experiencing, and you realize that you are the only one that can limit yourself, then you can blame yourself and say, I am responsible. Except that usually the ego says, you are the one that's responsible. You stupid little thing. See how stupid you have been? You have ruined your whole life. And you're still listening to the voice for fear that at first said everyone else was responsible, and which is now saying, you are responsible. You have ruined your life. And that's even worse than the idea that you had that everyone else did, that everyone else was responsible. There is no difference because you haven't stepped outside of the ego's point of view. And it is the ego which is speaking in both cases. If your brothers are part of you, and you blame them for your deprivation, you are blaming yourself, because they're part of you. And you cannot blame yourself without blaming them. That is why blame must be undone, not reallocated. Blame must be abandoned, in other words. Lay it to yourself, and you cannot know yourself, for only the ego blames at all. Self-blame is therefore ego identification, and as strong an ego defense as blaming others. I've been telling you repeatedly, you are neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing toward it. You are at that point and must understand yourself therefrom. And the same thing must be applied to your brothers and sisters as you look at them. Because this is the only stance that you can take that steps out of the box, the frame of reference in which blame rules. You have to abandon blame. And the only way to abandon blame is to step into an arena where it doesn't exist. No matter what you think you've done in your ignorance, it hasn't subverted God. It hasn't changed or altered God. It hasn't diminished God. And it hasn't changed, subverted, or diminished you. Whatever you have thought you have done in your ignorance has accomplished nothing, and therefore there is no blame due. But in order to escape the illusion of suffering that accompanies believing that you have accomplished something, you must come to where I am and look at yourself with me. You must go where your guide is and look at yourself with him or her. You must step out of the arena, the box, in which guilt seems to be real and justified. And if you want to have a different experience of your brother or sister, you have to lift your brother or sister out of that box as well, in your own mind. So that in your consideration of that one, you are reflecting back to that one the truth that heals. The Father's point of view. You cannot enter God's presence if you attack His Son. We've spoken of your insistence upon being an authorizer of definitions and meanings as an attack on God. But it's also an attack on you. It's also a denial of who you are. And in that state, you give definitions, apply definitions to your brothers and sisters in the world, and that constitutes an attack on them. You cannot enter God's presence if you attack His Son. This is why the sonship is your salvation. Because the sonship is what has been attacked. And you have to withdraw your attack on them. And in withdrawing your attack on the sonship, you undo the attack. And the sonship becomes the reason for your undoing the attack, so that your act of withdrawal of attack constitutes an act of love, an act of defenselessness, which allows the sonship to register with you in its true light. When His Son, when God's Son, lifts His voice in praise of His Creator by saying, I see God there. I'm willing to see God there. I want to see God there. When God's Son lifts His voice in praise of His Creator, He will hear the voice of His Father. Yet the Creator cannot be praised without His Son. You see, you can't just join with God. Yet the Creator cannot be praised without His Son. For their glory is shared, and they are glorified together. Why? Because they aren't separate from each other. The movement of God is the movement of creation that looks like all of you, all of us, and the world and the universe. if you glorify one part of it, you are glorifying the whole of it. Because there aren't really parts. And your willingness to even see the Father in a part of the universe leads to a spontaneous recognition of the truth of your love everywhere. But you got to get the first domino to fall before the others will fall after it. And you start with your brother. Christ is at God's altar, waiting to welcome his, God's Son. Your guide waits. The Holy Spirit, that which is nothing more than your right mind, waits at the altar in the center of your being to welcome God's Son. But come wholly without condemnation. Leave your definitions outside the door. Leave that which would determine that your brother is something less than what God is being right there, which is a condemnation, at the door. For otherwise you will believe that the door is barred and you cannot enter. A very simple way of putting this is that if you wish to companion with or commune with the Holy Spirit, that which is nothing more than your right mind, or with your guide, you must manage to still your mind enough to abandon your preoccupation with your definitions and your distresses and your judgments, etc. Because if you try to bring them along with you, in effect, you will not be in a state of mental peace or quiet. And you will not be able to hear the Holy Spirit or your guide. Why? Not because they don't answer, but because you are bringing with you too much noise. Too much of your attention is preoccupied with something other than listening for the Holy Spirit. Christ is at God's altar, waiting to welcome his Son. But come wholly without condemnation, for otherwise you will believe that the door is barred and that you cannot enter. The door is not barred, and it is impossible for you to be unable to enter the place where God would have you be. That's just the simple fact. But if you have something you would rather be doing than coming in simplicity into the quietness of you, where you can hear the Holy Spirit or your guide, you will not hear anything. Even though that's where God would have you be. But love yourself with the love of Christ, for so does your Father love you. You can refuse to enter, and I say refuse in the sense of choosing to do something other with your mind than giving your full attention to listening. You can refuse to enter, but you cannot bar the door which Christ holds open. Come unto me, who holds it open for you. Or come unto the Holy Spirit, which holds it open for you. For while I live, it cannot be shut, and I live forever. God is my life and yours, and nothing is denied by God to his Son. At God's altar, right in the center of you, Christ waits for the restoration of himself in you. I am God's Son. And I wait for your realization that you are God's Son to return to you. And I hold the door open for that realization to return to you. And that door cannot be closed not just because I hold it open, but because the Holy Spirit, that which is nothing more than your right mind, stands holding your divinity in trust while you dally with an ego sense of things, and holds it for you, if need be, forever, because your divine self, which you're ignoring at the moment, is eternal as well. God knows his Son, you, as wholly blameless as himself, and he is approached through the appreciation of his Son. God is approached by your appreciation of your brother. Not for what your brother's doing, but for what your brother truly is, in spite of what he may be doing. Christ waits for your acceptance of him as yourself and of his wholeness as yours. You see, I am your salvation. The sonship is your salvation. Because we wait for you to recognize us in yourself, because that's how you remember who you are, and that's how the sonship becomes one again in full conscious awareness of itself, without having to wait for you to remember who you are, while you insist upon playing at being who you aren't. For Christ is the Son of God, who lives in his Creator and shines with his glory. You see? You've been trying to shine with glory of your own, thinking that that's all there was for you to do. But there's more for you to be. And you need to begin to take hold of it and be it more consciously. Christ, you, is the extension of the love and the loveliness of God, as perfect as his Creator and at peace with him. You see? You're at that point. The point of perfection. And these words are describing you from that point, which is the reality of you at this moment. Blessed is the Son of God, whose radiance is of his Father, and not at his own hand, not of his own creation. Blessed is the Son of God, whose radiance is of his Father, and whose glory he wills to share as his Father shares it with him. And I will add, and by sharing, being able to keep it for yourself. There is no condemnation in the Son, for there is no condemnation in the Father. Sharing the perfect love of the Father, the Son must share what belongs to him, the Father, for otherwise he will not know the Father or the Son. In other words, until you endorse it, you won't be able to keep it. You won't have it as a conscious experience. Peace be unto you who rest in God and not in your own private little goals, competitive goals. Peace be unto you who rest in God and in whom the whole sonship rests. If you were to go to a medical practitioner, or let's say a health practitioner, no matter what area of healthcare you might consider, you would go because you needed help, because in one way or another you were suffering. And you would expect the health professional to provide the best that was available on your behalf. Now, whenever a brother or a sister comes into your experience, walks into the room, walks past your line of sight, this one has come into your experience and is there to be in relationship with, even if it's only to notice that they are there and that they're headed for the candy counter or the checkout stand or wherever. But for that time, you're in relationship with them. And you're there to bless them. You're there to bless them. Not to evaluate their clothing. Not to evaluate their tone of voice. But to give an acknowledgement. You are there like the healthcare professional. Every single one of you deserves the best health care. The attitude and the behaviors that make you better than you were before the encounter. You have the option in every encounter with a brother, no matter how distant or intimate it might be, to bless them by remembering, to whatever degree you are able, that they are neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing toward it, no matter what they think. But they are at that point. Everyone needs that acknowledgement to be made about them and for them, because none of you remember it consistently. And every single one of you need the blessing of that kind of mindful attention. Healthcare. Mindful attention. And no matter how obnoxious they are, no matter how unkind they are, no matter how much their behavior is governed by their fear, you need to remember what the truth is, that they've forgotten. And not indulge in spontaneous self-righteous judgment of their behavior, but to get beneath it, even past the fear that is generating the behavior, to the acknowledgement of the ultimate truth about them. Because that, for lack of better words, is a health care treatment. You must dare to be persistent and consistent. Again, we read earlier, only you can deprive yourself of anything. Do not oppose this realization, for it is truly the beginning of the dawn of light. Remember also that the denial of this simple fact, that only you can deprive yourself of anything, takes many forms, and these you must learn to recognize and to oppose steadfastly and without exception. You must become more diligent. In the process of reorienting your attention. You see, you don't reallocate blame. You reorient your attention. You must step out of the level of blaming the other person for his or her problems. Because the other person is having problems because he or she is blaming himself or herself for her problems, or blaming others for their problems. But it's all in that arena in which nothing but conflict can be experienced, because there's no premise being utilized of innocence, of being at the point of perfection, of the acknowledgement of the fact that you never, ever could have managed to separate yourself from God and do something awful that you must be punished for, that you are guilty of, that blame can rightly be laid at your doorstep for. Now, last week, I spoke at some length about how loved you are. So that you might remember how loved you are. Or so that you might have an aha about how loved you are. So that you might be lifted up out of your poor definition of yourself, your unlovable definition of yourself, into a new arena in which your lovableness is natural.